Cześć, to jest kanał Nie Tylko Design, a ja nazywam się Tomasz Skórski. Zapraszam do rozmowy ze Stevem Portigalem, autorem książki Interviewing Users i Doorbells, Danger and Dead Batteries. Ze Stevem miałem przyjemność rozmawiać na konferencji Product Camp 2018. Miłego oglądania. Hello. Right now, in the world of massive effectiveness, design sprints to zero, agile, scrum, we expect that everything will be done more and more fast and effective. And my question really is, how exactly the user research, formative user research, might be conducted in that world?
Yeah, I think it's part of the condition of living in our world that we think things are getting faster, but the idea that things are getting faster is not a new issue. We just always feel like, oh, it's just us, but if you talk to people 10 years ago, they would say, oh yes, we had all this pressure to be faster and more efficient. So it's not like that's going to go away, but it's not like it's new either. And I think you identify a really important challenge that people face, that the way project schedules are created and the way methods are adopted inside organizations means that the way that work had been done in the past maybe doesn't fit. And so I think it's an appropriate issue to be concerned about. And in my view, you talk to different teams, different organizations, the way there's a culture inside every business, and research may be important, or it may be sort of a second-class citizen or a third-class citizen without a value. And so it depends on how much does that company believe that learning about the users in this formative way that is so strategic, so important, how much does the organization support that? So in an organization that supports it, they will find a way. They will say this is important, and we're going to do it. And in other places, there's less support for it. And so, I have colleagues who have decided that, they can't grow as a researcher, as a leader. They have to find another job in another organization because these kinds of pressures that you're describing don't create a welcoming environment for research. I think and thinking about the tactics of doing research, there's many different, it's not just one thing that we have to do. So if there is a sprint with, milestones and a product is being shipped, then maybe the kinds of questions you're going to answer and therefore the tools that you can use, what kind of research you're going to be doing, has to be constrained to fit into that. But that doesn't mean in your job, in your day as a researcher in a company, that's the only research project that you have. So I always feel like, well, why can't these formative studies, these things that are going to inform the strategy and help change the conversation internally about who our customers are and what they value, why can't those run on their own track and create knowledge and create information that can be shared and kind of, I'm thinking of sort of a train track with lines coming off of it where the information feeds out into these different groups at different times. But, and so let me just add one more thing to it. In order to make that work, you need, I believe, some kind of leadership in the organization around research, either around user experience or around research specifically that says, okay, we have all these different organizational needs, and we're going to do this whole different set of research projects with these different methods, with different timelines, and we believe it's important to do formative research, so we're going to do it every year, every quarter, we're going to do 2 or 3, whatever the amount is. But the research leadership needs to plan that. When research is just taking requests from product managers or from design managers, of course it's going to be required to fit into the sprint model or the agile model. But if we're being proactive and saying, here's what we need to do, then you just need the person to be able to make that declaration.
But But do you really believe that business is really warmly welcome the research with user, with people, instead of numbers and data, big data, some findings and some analysis?
Historically, I would have put those two as competitors or as opposites. But more and more, I meet groups where they view those as collaborators. And I'm so excited by that because it's better when these different groups work together.
Yeah, and in general, mixed methods also.
And general mixed methods, right. So why can't data scientists be one of the mixed methods? And, research is great for answering questions, but it's also great for identifying new questions. And so, when you do a formative study, you always get this question, well, how many people did this? How many people think that? Well, we only have a small sample, but hey, our data scientists either know already or can put together an instrument that can get that information, or the data scientists can identify behaviors and then ask us to understand what's the motivation for those behaviors.
Okay, so in general, you are saying more about collaborating between big data
Yes.
and more qualitative
Yes.
research.
Yes, and I'm saying that that collaboration is more common than it used to be. It's not, people aren't choosing, they are creating mixed methods.
Is it also because of the technology which is becoming more and more accessible? I guess, or maybe not.
Yeah, is it a techno? I don't know.
I mean, getting the input, especially these big numbers,
Yeah.
is getting more and more available. So maybe that's the reason why getting the answer fast, based on the numbers, is
Yeah.
more easy to get than in
Right.
the early 90s, for example.
Right, but in the early 90s, you had other kinds of quantitative data. You had market research departments, and you had surveys, and you had, weblogs. So it was not sophisticated, but I think the qual versus quant kind of, competition.
And never-ending story.
Yeah, so I don't know that, more data means more collaboration. I think, better collaborative culture means more collaboration. That's my interpretation, that it's not about the tools have changed, but the culture has also evolved in a positive way. That's my hopeful interpretation of what I see.
I personally like a lot this interpretation. Right now there is more or less the trend with the participatory design, with the co-design or collaborative design. There are different terms for that. Sometimes it's called, I believe Liz Sanders call it the Scandinavian methods in general. Do you believe it's hopefully something more permanent, or is it just temporary trend, as sometimes trends are going, like for example eye tracking, right?
Yeah, again, I sort of look at history, just like our question about efficiency and time pressure before. I don't think participatory design is anything new, and I don't see it as a trend, which may be naive on my part. It's something that I've seen being discussed. I mean, you talk about Liz Sanders. I mean, there's a person that is a pioneer and has been pioneering these tools for decades and decades and decades.
Totally.
So, just Liz Sanders sort of proves to me that it's not a trend, and many other people.
Okay, what about when we are looking right now in our world, it's getting more and more intermingled, interconnected. I'm not referring just to the Internet of Things, but voice interfaces are going more and more popular. We have distributed interfaces on multiple devices, on our TVs, on our mobile devices, on our desktop at the same time. And observing people seems to be more and more complicated. Is it possible, or is it proper approach to conduct more and more ethnographic studies? Because we need to observe closer to the people, and technology also allow us that without any formal education or formal experience on that.
So let me try to reflect back your question and make sure I understand. So given the kinds of things that we're trying to design now, the complexity of them and the as you said, the intertwinkled nature of the things we're designing, is there an increasing value for ethnographic research performed by lots of different types of people?
Educated researchers, yes. That's my question.
Oh, educated researchers specifically?
I mean, my question really is how exactly the education is important in the context of this more complex world. That's my question.
Yeah. Okay, so the world is getting more complex, and so what will current and future designers and makers of products and services need to be able to do in order to deal with this? And again, I think there's sort of a theme in our conversation that we can look at new pressures that are emerging. I mean, I wasn't around, but don't you think in 1953 people were saying, our world is getting so complicated and it's changing, and we have, these new things happening, and we have advertising, and we have television, and we have jet airplanes, and I've seen charts that say that the rate of change now is greater than it was in the past. So I don't want to be, I think what you're saying is at its root is true, right? And so what does that mean for people that are designing, let's just use the word design very, very broadly, that are making things that have to go out into this world? Yes, the world, and again, things change and things are the same. Like if you look at people's lives, they still have, you can take the very new issues, and there are definitely new issues. If you are, a tween girl and you are using Instagram, and there are lots of, my understanding that there's a lot of social pressures and a lot of rituals around who posts what and when and what permission they get and who likes it, and so that's clearly more.
And
how fast, right? So that's new and that's complicated, and so parents didn't go through that, and so they don't know how to advise and coach that. That is new. We didn't have that. And so yeah, you can say we all drive cars and have jobs and commute and ride bikes and watch television, and like that's sort of been the same. But you're right, there are these, so there are these new technologies, but then those technologies are changing how behaviors are happening. So I'm just going to working through your question. So, right, if you're designing an app for tween girls, I don't know if you use the word tween. It's in between. Tween means 11 or 12. They're not teenagers, but they're not little kids. And tween girls have all this purchasing power, and they have all this brand loyalty, and they start using technology differently. And so, just a demographic term. If you want to make something for those people and you don't understand, wow, life is really, really different. Or if you want to sell to parents and you don't understand that the pressures on parents are different now because changing expectations of the educational system or, new fears, you better understand the how things are new and different and changing for the audience that you want to design for. It's a very long way of saying, yes, the complexity of the world changes for a lot of reasons, cultural, political, technical is the one that maybe all of us are most focused on and that we see kind of more obviously day to day. But it's just the last thing I'll say in my very long answer is I think we need to be looking and understanding at how the introduction of these technologies is changing or has changed previous behaviors. So it's less about voice interfaces and more about parents are having new discussions with their children about being polite, right? There's a whole thing about Alexa, I think, doesn't require you to say please, but now it does, and parents are kind of, so those are interesting changes in family roles. It's less about voice interfaces and more about the consequences of voice interfaces that create really important questions for researchers, designers, product people to be asking in order to find their next opportunity and to help it be as successful as possible.
And what about this education on observing such thing? And because that was the root of the...
Right. I get a long answer. Didn't even answer your question. Thank you very much.
No. Actually, the answer was very good, and you know, I was not even trying to interrupt you on that. From your words, maybe my interpretation is wrong. But I feel that your answer is more or less that it's obviously having the framework and proper education helps a lot on that, because this word from few angles are getting more complicated, but it's not 100% required to really be a good researcher and observe the world.
I think this is a big question, isn't it? Is who does research? And I think, you know, as a researcher, I want to speak for the people that I identify with as my peers. I think we're in a really interesting position because researchers have always been saying, like, research is important, it's hard, you have to go about it the right way, and we want everyone to be doing it. It's interesting to me that so many people who are researchers are actively teaching other people to do research. And so, right, we don't want to hold on to it just for ourselves and say, well, only these special people can do it. I mean, I do not have educational background in research. I have an apprenticeship model of learning, and I have years and years of experience. So it's still always amusing for me to be seen as an expert. I'm confident in my skill, but I also know that I didn't learn this in school, and there was a time in which if you didn't have a formal education background, you weren't welcome as a researcher. And I think people learn research in lots of different kinds of professions and lots of different kinds of education, and that a thing I love about the profession of research is it seems to pull a certain kind of person who is has curiosity and has empathy and has good listening, or wants to learn how to do those things. And so who the researchers are a mix, but I like who's in that mix. And then I think you have a world of people that are not researchers but perform research and can do it well. Maybe those are designers, maybe there's somebody else, and everyone has to talk to users is kind of the philosophy. And so I think a question that, somewhere I think in your question or where I'm taking it is, how did those two groups coexist? We have people that more or less, let's say they identify themselves as researchers, and people that more or less identify themselves as having skills in doing research. And that doesn't mean one skill level is better than the other, it's just sort of the context in which it's being done. Anyway, there's lots and lots of talking to... The amount of work to be done in talking to people is large, and it's not all being satisfied. There's a demand for that work to be done. Whether or not we know there's a demand, there's a need, I guess, maybe is the better word. So all of us need to be getting better at it, and all of us need to be doing it. And I think it raises some questions about, well, what work does the researcher do, and what work does the designer who's good at research do, and how do we sort of assign those roles and set up organizations and teams? I don't know. That's a really important question that I'm struggling with in my own work.
But I believe this is also the great answer, that you are saying that those work needs to obviously coexist, and we have different skills and approaches, but the best thing is to use it as a research. The thing which you have just said was something that we always expected, that everyone would be more or less researcher, right? And we are finally getting to that point when everyone start to be designer, to be a researcher as well. And when we are getting to that point, we start to thinking if it's really the good idea after all, right? So that's kind of my consideration of that. Okay. Also, when we are discussing and when I'm asking you this question, I'm returning more or less to the technology as the part which getting somehow more important, more and more. Do you believe that in user research, machine learning is something which might support, might help, might solve some problem, or maybe even might replace the researcher? And this, honestly speaking, I don't believe, but I believe how the machine learning might influence the user research world.
I saw something, and I don't remember where I saw it or what the specifics were, so just warn you that there's some missing details here, but it was some kind of chatbot type of technology that would, and it wasn't literally a user research interview, but it was conducting a query back and forth, and it had some sophistication in asking follow-up questions. I think maybe I heard a podcast about it, and it got me thinking about, boy, could my job be taken away by a chatbot? I think it's a question lots of people ask themselves.
Have you seen latest Google conference?
Oh, right. This is
with those booking and reservation system.
Yeah.
Automatically.
Right. And when I thought about, again, it's obviously in my interest to speak to the value of the human in this work. I started thinking about, okay, so let's imagine we have a chatbot that, like, maybe the chatbot could conduct this interview. I mean, no, but let's just imagine as an exercise could conduct this interview. But the point of doing user research is, and I know we're doing a podcast, but let's simulate a research interview. You're interviewing me to get data. If a chatbot conducted this, we would have a recording, but the researcher wouldn't have learned anything. Like it's the user research interview is not about producing the output. It's about the creative journey that the researcher goes on through this. It's not data production. It's experiential learning.
And interpreting the
and
data.
Right, and that some of that is happening. So the interview is over. You didn't have to do any work. There's a lovely transcript, but you didn't get anything out of it. Like, research is a participatory activity for the researcher. So that would really just change the nature of it. You're now receiving data. I think there's so many different types of research and so many different processes, and it's interesting to think about, the way that it's man plus robot or human plus robot. I didn't mean to be gendered about that. That is interesting opportunities for work. So what are tasks that we do that could be supplemented? Like researchers do pattern matching. That's a really important thing that we do, and it's a human thing, but I don't think most of us have any idea how we're actually doing that, how we're finding themes and connections between these things that we're getting cues about. But I would be curious about some tool that would support me in pattern matching, that would maybe give me some different ways of looking at it. I'm also not someone that is hungry for new technology in work that I do that feels very personal and human. So I would not be the first person to try something out. Like, I'm describing something, and probably somewhere at a university laboratory in Amsterdam, somebody is prototyping some version of this. I don't know. I wouldn't make it my business to know. I have some fears around not just being displaced, but also I just maybe a second part to this topic, which is about trying to do user research in a way that is about objective scientific measurement. I don't like that. And I've seen methodologies where they measure brain waves. They do try to see if people are telling the truth. And that's about a machine interpreting something about the body, and I'm much more interested in the person interpreting the thing about the other person. That's what excites me about the work. So we have all these people that are like, oh, we're going to read inside the human brain and get to the truth, and we can see if you're going to like an advertisement or not. I don't have any interest in that. And so I fear that sort of the machine learning sort of, technology solutions is going to be, again, we're going to have truth, as opposed to sort of amplifying the human strengths that make research so interesting to begin with.
Actually, a lot of to process it, right? I believe that you might be very right, that still the improvements in the technology might help us to get the data, but searching for the pattern and interpreting them, still it would be the researcher role. And I believe this is very good, the final comment on that. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.